In this episode, we hear from Devon Gray, the actor and writer who actually played Dexter in the original series. If you remember, in the flashbacks, he was there playing a teenage version of the serial killer.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. I'm excited to talk about all things Dexter.
I'm dying to know from you, Devon, to begin with, when you took on the role of a teenage Dexter in those flashbacks, we see it. You play a very pivotal role about his upbringing in his life in the original series. How did you land that role? How did that come about for you?
Well, I it was the second job I ever booked as an actor, and the first was a pilot that didn't get picked up, so nobody ever saw it. And I remember I'd moved to LA, like I'd been there for 6 or 7 months, and my car got locked in some garage the night before the audition, so I couldn't go home and print off the sides and kind of get all ready. The sides are like what we use in auditions as actors, parts of the script. So I panicked and I had to like find a hotel that night. I was like in some area I didn't know very well, so it was a very chaotic entry into the world of Dexter. Because then the next day I showed up at this audition. I took like a taxi cab to get there, and I didn't know any of the lines. I didn't really have time to work on the material. I just had to kind of get in and wing it, which I never would typically do for an audition. But I think it just goes to show that a lot of the time with casting, there's an innate thing someone has or they don't have that feels like the character. And I think that I just, even though I didn't have time to really work, and probably if I had too much time, I would have messed things up by overthinking it. And so there was something nice about just being thrown into that audition room. Kind of my first instincts were the first things there. And I was 19, but I think he's meant to be 15 when I'm playing him. So it was, that was also kind of funny to be playing somebody quite a bit younger. But yeah, I mean, and I say a lot of the time that I think one of the things that I didn't know at the time, but why I think I got the part was that I think I look a little like Michael C. Hall in some ways, not a ton really, but there's similarities there. But I think that I had this, because I grew up gay and like in a very religious family where I felt like I felt like I had a dark secret. I felt like I had this part of me that I didn't like and I wanted to hide. And the character of Dexter has the same thing. Like he has this part he's trying to hide, and he's terrified he's going to get caught, and he hates this part of himself. And so I think that was my natural instincts kind of knew what to do, because I was living with my own secret and my own sort of thing that I felt shame around. So yeah, so I think that was probably somehow a bit connected in that, and that's probably what they saw on a level.
I mean, the kind of chaos, as you say, your car being locked away and things like that, that must have, because obviously you need to play that kind of character in a certain way. And maybe, as you say, it helped the fact that you went in to those kinds of auditions a little bit maybe frantic, and that came across in a good way.
Yeah, honestly, it's true. I think that it was because I'm very usually type A with that stuff, and I will study the lines, and I'll know exactly, like back then I would want to know exactly how I was going to do it. And there's something I think, and as I've grown as an actor, I've realized that some of the best acting happens when you don't plan and when you don't try to control, and it just kind of happens. So I think it did. I think it helped me.
And obviously, maybe you've taken that as a thing in the rest of your career going forward, working in going to different auditions afterwards. Maybe that kind of helped in a way going forward for the rest of, from here on out.
Yeah, I think it definitely is something that in hindsight I realize, that it is a helpful thing. I wish it had maybe helped quicker, but I think it still took me a few years to realize, like, oh, that actually is a key here, is to not try to control everything so much.
I like the fact that you obviously, are very open about being gay and having that as a secret growing up, and using that, I guess, in a certain way, as you say, Dexter's hiding this big secret, isn't he, about his life, and that's fascinating. And obviously, actors must do that kind of thing all the time, bring things from their lives, your life, into a role. So, what else did you bring into play in a role like Dexter as a teenager?
Well, I mean, again, I think the gay thing was something it wasn't a secret to myself, but it was certainly I don't think I was even aware that I was doing that. That was something years later when I look at the performance. I'm like, oh, that's what I was actually talking about, was that scene where the dad finds me in the shed with the knives. And now I realize, oh, that was like if I was caught, being gay as a kid, like that would have been like what the reaction would have been. And but it was unconscious, I think, at the time. In terms of other things, I think probably something else that I have is I love dark things. I've always been drawn to the macabre. I've always been fascinated with, murder mysteries and serial killers. And that's ever since I was a kid, I sort of liked that stuff. So I think that again was just a natural. I remember the casting directors being like, yeah, there's a darkness in you. We see a darkness in you, like innately. And that's something I don't think I could help. It was just part of uh, who I am, for whatever, whether it's nurture or nature. That's part of me.
And being on a set of a show that grew to be such a massive thing, Dexter was and still is very popular as a show. What was it like surrounding yourself with actors like Michael C. Hall? Did you have to study him at all to kind of get mannerisms right, or how did that work?
I remember thinking that logically, I was like, we should have like a day that I'm sure they'll have us have a day where we like talk about the character. And again, it was my first job, so I didn't really realize how quickly these things move and how there isn't time to think about that stuff on TV a lot of the time. It's, if it was a movie, maybe there'd be a week of rehearsals, but with this, it was just kind of being thrown in the deep end. I think I remember they had already filmed the pilot, and there was a younger actor playing my part initially. Yeah. And they realized, I think, that they wanted to see him at a different age when he starts to kill, and when the knives are found and he kills the animals, that my scenes were being filmed later, sort of as pickups for what they shot already. So I think that was, in terms of having time to really talk to Michael, I don't even think I met Michael C. Hall until we were already shooting a few episodes. I think I met him at a table read at some point. And then in one of the episodes, there's a moment where he's choking a character, and it sort of morphs into me for a moment. Like you see that it's like a moment flash where it becomes his young self. And that was the only time I ever worked with him and really talked to him was that day. So no, we didn't. In fact, I filmed the whole first season sort of having no idea what he was doing with the character. And just trusting. And I think that's where the director and the showrunners come in, and they sort of steer if they feel like it's not quite the right performance isn't syncing up. They would step in and say stuff.
And Devon, tell me about the reaction when you got the part and obviously started playing the character. Beyond their friends, family, people that who perhaps would watch it, what were people thinking and saying?
Again, I grew up in a very religious family, where a show like Dexter on Showtime, which was, I think people in the community I came from thought of Showtime as being this very like sinful, awful network. So I think a lot of people were a bit probably like cautious and worried for me that I was doing the show. And and I remember I went out and I bought the book that the series is based on, Darkly Dreaming Dexter. Yeah. And I started reading it immediately so I could have an understanding of what the story was and who the inner thoughts of this character. And I told my parents about it, and they were like, "Oh, that sounds really." I think my mom bought it as well because I think she wanted to like make sure I wasn't reading anything too terrible. But yeah, and honestly, like my parents did watch it. I think the first season. My siblings watched it, but a lot of the people that I knew at the time, I don't think they did watch it. It wasn't until later that I sort of found my own sort of group of friends in my own world that people later would be like, "Oh my God, you were Teenage Dexter," and I love that show. But at the time, my community was so different from the people that were actually watching Dexter. I have never even finished the original Dexter series. I've never watched. I think I watched up until John Lithgow season, which I loved. And then I kind of fell off. I think there was just so many shows to watch. And as an actor, too, when there's so many auditions, you're sort of trying to catch up on all the other shows so that if you audition for something, you kind of understand the tone and and I only did the first 2 seasons of Dexter. So I was already done with the character, and it felt like an old life.
It must have, as you say, just kind of I guess, fallen by the side as you were trying to get other roles and you were looking at doing other work and writing as well, which I know is a big thing in your life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It was, I think the thing about Dexter was that it definitely launched my career as an actor in a way that it I don't know where I would be as an actor if it wasn't for Dexter, because it was such a big show at that time. And I think my agents and managers had no problem getting me into auditions just by saying like, oh, he's Teenage Dexter. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, we know who he is. And but yeah, it was kind of this moment in my life, and then other things sort of took over after that. And yeah, I didn't keep up with it. One day, I'm sure it's on Netflix, I think, in the States now. So I think one day I'll just sit and just like binge the rest of it.
Dude,
see where it all
goes. I recommend it. How weird's that? Me recommending it to you. That you've been in it.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Obviously, Devon, as I say, beyond Dexter Life, beyond the show, you kind of stuck around as well with liking, like you said, about the macabre, the kind of horror side of things. I know with writing, as I say, very important in your life. What makes you kind of driven towards that genre of thing, particularly with a pen and paper to write stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know entirely where it comes from. I just know that ever since I was a kid, I liked the dark things. I would be at a museum, and the one painting I'd be drawn to was the picture of the house on fire and the chaos around it. And my mom would always be worried about me, like, oh, why is that the one that you like? Why do you like that sort of thing? And I don't know where it comes from. But my mind seems to work in that way, especially as a writer. I love mysteries. I do love horror. I came to horror kind of late. I didn't start watching horror movies until I was probably like 21 or something. I started really watching horror, and then I loved it, but I wasn't allowed to watch it as a kid. So that genre sort of became the one as a writer that I was like, I think I know how to do this. Like, this feels natural to me, these kinds of stories. And then with my acting background, I think it helps with bringing in human characters and trying to bring that side to horror that sometimes can get left behind, where horror is so about the jump scares and the gore and the plot, where the characters can feel a little weak. So I think that I was excited to be like, oh, I want to bring cool characters to this world in a way that obviously lots of horror already does, but that's sort of been my main goal as a horror writer, is to almost like write a drama first and foremost with cool characters, and then bring the horror in around them all. And again, I don't know where that comes from, but it is the natural instinct in me, especially with like, I love manipulating. And I think as a writer with horror, especially like mystery horror, you can sort of manipulate the audience the whole time. And so that when the final reveal comes, the final sort of moment, there's all those breadcrumbs you've laid. And then it's a really satisfying, exciting, hopefully an exciting thing that you're left with as an audience member, is feeling like you were on this journey that really like ripped the rug out from under you. And that is sort of the thing I strive to do. And horror kind of lends itself the best to that kind of,
because there's so many like little strands in horror as a genre, the thriller sort of thing. I mean, Dexter would probably be at times be a horror, wouldn't it? It would be a thriller horror, like, absolutely. And the thing of, with that genre, as I say, there's so many little strands you can go down, whether that's the kind of gorier side or jump scares or a little bit comedic at times, those sorts of things. And it's such a fun thing to play with. I mean, myself, I've tried to write audio dramas in the past in a horror genre, and just the fact that you can use tense music and sound effects that can be really like a creaking floorboard, those little details make a huge impact, don't they?
It's actually funny that you write radio dramas, because when I was 14, the thing that I wanted to do more than anything was write radio dramas. Like, I thought that was so I wrote one when I was 14, and I like got some actors from the local college to come play the parts, and I rented a recording studio for the day, and it was also kind of dark, and as dark as I was allowed to be at 14. But the sound design of all of that is something that I've always loved, and I've always loved the idea of audio being something that is used. And some really good horror, they do utilize audio as one of like the main ways you scare somebody, because so often what we see, the minute we see something, it's not scary anymore because we're in communication with it. But when it's when we can't reach it and access it, but it's there somewhere through audio. That I always think that's some of the scariest stuff.
Devon, it's a pleasure to chat with you. I want to know, again, if we can go back to Dexter to end, your 3 things that you've taken away from being a part of a show like that. 3 little things that you could say, I've got this, I've got that, and I've got the other.
Oh man. Okay.
Put you on the spot there, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think what, I'm sure I'll hang up from this call and be like, oh wait, there's way more poignant things than these things. But I guess one thing I did learn on Dexter is as much as I can be type A about lines, once I had the job, I was sort of like, oh, I have this job. I am, not untouchable, but it was sort of like, I don't have to put in the same effort, which is horrible, which is like that. I never should have thought that way. But I remember there was a day we were shooting in Miami where it was a scene, I think it's episode 4 or 5. It's a scene where we're on pumpkin kind of, it's like a hayride kind of thing, and it's going around. And I'm with James Raymer, who plays the dad, and Haley King or Hunter King, who plays my sister. And I had like a little bit of a monologue in it about like why I didn't think the hayride was very fun. And I didn't really take the time to learn the lines the way I should have at all. And I remember I thought like, I'm going to have time. They'll give me time and I'll find my way. And they wanted to do it in like 2 quick takes because we were losing the light. And I just fumbled the lines like crazy. And it was awful. It was so embarrassing. And the director was getting kind of frustrated with me, and it was not great. And it put the fear of God into me after that, about like learning lines. And that's something I think back to. I can still feel what that felt like. And so I now am like religious about learning my lines. On any job I ever get, I will run it till it's insane. And then I'll feel like I'm never in the position again where I like hold up production, and like, all the eyes are on you when you're doing that. And it's not nice. That's very long. That's a very long way to say that I learned to be more prepared.
No, I love that. I remember that scene very well. And it's fascinating now, if I was to rewatch it, knowing that that's, how you were feeling at the time, that would be another sort of extra thing, an extra element to it.
Well, something you'll notice if you watch the scene is I was so terrible in that scene that they had to bring me in to do ADR in the studio, which is when they bring actors back in to re-record lines because they didn't like my performance. So I had to go back in and redo that little monologue like months later in the recording studio. So if you watch it, it doesn't even quite sync with my mouth. So you pay attention next time, and you'll see that like that is not the audio recorded on the day.
That's
because I was bad at my job that day. So the other things, I mean, I guess a lot of what I write now is I will attribute to Dexter in a way, because I got amazing scripts. Like one of my first jobs was this amazingly written show by amazing writers from a book that was also beautifully written. And so I think that instilled something in me for sure. It was just, I was lucky enough to have that be one of the first things I did was something that was really well written, which is a luxury as an actor, because I've done a lot of things that are not that way. So that's that's the second thing, I guess. And then the third thing, God, what would the third thing even be? One thing that is lovely is that Haley King, who played my sister on Dexter, she was the young Jennifer Carpenter. I think now she goes by Hunter King. Their family, the King family, became very close friends after that. And I ended up living with them for like almost 3 years while I was kind of a struggling actor in LA and not having a ton of money for rent. They like let me live in their downstairs bedroom for like $200 a month. And that was something that really, like, that experience in meeting this lovely family was something that really put me in a good position to get jobs later on. And I will always like connect Dexter mostly to that time in my life of living with them and getting to meet them. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully those are interesting tidbits, but.
Well, Devon, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the podcast. You've had your slice of Dexter in the past, and now we get to hear all about it. So it's a pleasure to be chatting with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. I loved getting to do this. Thank you.